Hello, my love, and welcome to this video. I am showing you, or I am going to show you, parts of my trauma healer certificate. My trauma healer certificate is my baby, it's my legacy. It's a 1 year training program that we will be together in for 12 months, side by side, a small amount of people, 5 to 6 participants, intimate space where I train you to become deeply human. I train you how to heal trauma, how to support your clients the best, and how to get rid of so many things that they've been carrying on for the rest of their lives. So I decided to bring you a couple of videos from my module, and I decided to have this introduction beforehand so that you know, oh, okay, so this is what we're going to see. And at the same time, I want you to just be aware this is free knowledge, right? This is stuff that I'm giving out for free that usually costs starting at 14 to 16k euros a year, because this is a very specialized training. My promise is not only that I will support you get rid of most of your trauma, but also that you will start your business during that year and that you will get clients during that year, because essentially I require you to. It's part of the requirement process of getting your certificate at the end of the year. So the trauma healer is yeah, there's nothing else I can say other than it's my legacy, and you'd have to experience it yourself, and only a few people will in this lifetime, just because I'm keeping it very intimate, very private. And the only way to become a trauma healer is to actually go to a one-to-one with me. That doesn't need to be long-term, that can even be short-term one-to-one, but I need to know you before we start working together for such a long amount of time, because this is a really intimate commitment, and I don't want anybody there who's not willing to put in the work and the time and who's just sabotaging themselves the entire time. Been there, done that. I want to work with people who know exactly what they want, who want to achieve great things in this world, and whether that is leaving the system or supporting people in leaving the system or revolutionizing stuff, you have to know that this training is going to be the hardest and the toughest thing that you've ever done in your life, no matter how much tough shit you've done. You think your trauma was tough? I'm going to be tougher. So, without further ado, and if you're watching this again, you can skip this part, love. Yeah, you can skip this part. I cannot wait to introduce you to my body of work and have fun. Hello, my love, and happy welcome to the Trauma Healer Certificate with the first module, the first Learn Nervous System Theory and Biology module. I cannot wait to do this with you. So, without further ado, let's start. What are the learning goals? What is the nervous system? What are the positional and directional terms? What are anatomical axes? How's the nervous system structured? How is a nerve cell structured? How does your nervous system affect our body? What types of nerve fibers are there? What types of receptors are there? How are stimuli processed in our body? What does our nervous system want? So these are the basic things that we get to learn here. And I just cannot wait. Oh my God, so excited. So first of all, this entire certificate program is like like medicine. It's doing like a medicine degree basically. So I personally am not so I'm not going to probably ever use these terms, but I just want you to know them, just so that I've heard them before. If you're a registered nurse, you know these things. If if you've kind of studied psychology, you know these things. Just to refresh the axes, the planes, and to look at each of them and why sometimes you will find, for instance, in studies, you will find cross sections, or you'll find scans, and then you will see, oh, this is the sagittal axis, or hey, this is the sagittal plane. So you know exactly what this is talking about, right? So we have the main axis of the body is we have the sagittal axis, we have the transverse axis, and the longitudinal axis, so that you can see these things in number 1, which is the longitudinal, this way. The sagittal axis is number 2. It's through basically, and the transverse axis. You can always remember this by remembering your transverse abdominals is the transverse axis, so side to side basically, and sagittal is front to back, right? And then top to down is longitudinal. Right. Main planes of the body, same thing, or very similar planes. Sagittal plane, which is number 2. So we have the sagittal plane, B here. It's supposed to be B and then C. So B. And transverse plane is letter C, right? Again, transverse. And the frontal plane is A. So what's the difference? You know, if you do like a CAT scan or a MRI, right? Like if you go through the X-ray machine, then they will do basically the transverse plane of scans, or sometimes the frontal plane, but that depends on how you go into the machine, if that makes sense, right? So when you're in the machine, it basically takes a picture of the transverse plane going from top to bottom, basically, which is, though this is the transverse plane, could be either when we talk about axes, we talk about a direction. When we talk about the plane, we talk about something that's situated there, just so that you know. All right. You will find in the Future Learn modules that there are German words as well, but if we see the Latin word that we're going to use anyways, I decided to keep the picture, right? But I'm going to explain it to you. And you will find the explanation on the left side. So for instance, we have cranial. So again, location and direction designations. Cranial, located towards the head. Caudal, located towards the tail. So this is caudal, right? Ventral, located towards the abdomen. You will hear this a lot with ventral and dorsal. Ventral, vagal, dorsal. You'll hear that a lot. So ventral, dorsal, remember that. Cranial, just know that that's the head, crane. Caudal, know that that's the tail. All of the other things I don't use a lot. We will revisit that probably with FRC, but yeah, and if you've studied FRC, obviously you know that kind of stuff already. So we have ventral located towards the abdomen, dorsal located towards the back, right? So here we have ventral, dorsal towards the back and towards the front is an easier way of remembering. You have the same thing with the foot as well. You have the dorsal, like the outside basically, and then the plantar, which is the inside, belonging to the sole of the foot. And then you have the palmar belonging to the palm of the hand, and the plantar belonging to the sole of the foot. Then we have superior, which is usually upper, right? Then we have inferior, which is usually the inner. So superior, upper, inferior, inner. Then we have the anterior, which is front, posterior, back, right? Posterior, back, anterior. We have the medius, which is the middle. Transverse is transverse, also very clear. Flexor is the flexor, it's the same thing. Extensor is the extensor. Superficialis just means superficial. Profundus is deep, and proximalis is towards the trunk. We have that here. And then we have also proximal, distal, and proximal towards the trunk, distal away. Yes. Dexter, this is, I don't think I've noted that down. This is a right, and then sinister is left. But these come from the Latin words. Then we have, lateralis away from the median plane and medialis towards the median plane. Anyways, we won't be using all of this. I just wanted to give you like a complete picture of that. The anatomical axes and planes, when we look at them from the perspective of just looking at the brain, because we will have lots of brain scans in the Learn module, the brain, and therefore I wanted to just for you to be familiar with what are we looking at, from what direction are we looking at. In this picture, you can see the Maynard axis and the Forel axis. The Maynard axis is the vertical axis through the brainstem. This is the brainstem. This is the vertical axis. And then we have the Forel axis, which is the horizontal axis through the midbrain and the cerebrum, which is this one here. This is the midbrain, and this is the cerebrum, right? And again, you will find superior above, anterior in front of, posterior behind, and inferior below. So just to see kind of what these different planes and axes are with regards to the brain, because in the brain segment, we're going to be seeing a lot of things about the brain and looking at pictures of the brain, of course. So Here we have the longitudinal axis of the forebrain, and here we have the longitudinal axis of the brain stem and the spinal cord. Yeah, so this is the brain stem and then followed by the spinal cord, and this is rostral and this is caudal. I hope you pronounce it like that, because in German we say caudal, so just bear with me if I mispronounce things. All right. Our bodies contain several billion nerve cells. These are responsible for communication between cells, for external and internal stimulus perception, internal stimulus processing, and response. Now, this is a structure that some of you may know from the power of trauma. This is a structure that I love to use to explain the nervous system and just like the basic nervous system. So we do have a central nervous system. And again, you don't need to remember all of these parts bit by bit. What's more important to me personally is that you have like the memory of how it works rather than what the exact name of every little thing is, right? So when we look at the central nervous system, this consists of the brain and the spinal cord, basically, and this is the main stimulus processor. So this is the big dude, basically. Then we have, which you see with these arrows here, the peripheral nervous system, which is called PNS. So we have CNS and we have PNS. And this is the voluntary, involuntary control of body functions, cranial nerves, spinal nerves, and sensory organs. So when we look at the peripheral nervous system, they're both equally important. But what we're going to focus on right now is the peripheral nervous system, because this is something that we can influence. I mean, we could influence the central nervous system. It just is more difficult, right? So the peripheral nervous system contains the somatic nervous system. So NS stands for nervous system, which means this is the voluntary nervous system. The somatic nervous system basically controls the body, the muscles, right? So this is something that we can actually control. Vegetative nervous system is more involuntary. However, this is the medical term, right? So these are all medical terms. This doesn't mean that you cannot control it. This doesn't mean that you cannot influence it. Of course, we can influence it, right? But how the nervous system functions within is involuntary, meaning we can't just flex a muscle and then it's going to be fine. However, we can influence the vegetative nervous system, for instance, with our breath, for instance, with certain movements, but we'll get to that when the time comes. So we have the sympathetic nervous system, we have the parasympathetic nervous system, and we have the gut brain. This doesn't mean that there is like a, how am I going to say it? Like, it's one big thing, right? It's not like, oh, we just have the parasympathetic, which is separate from the sympathetic, which is separate from the gut brain. No. They're all one, right? It's all one big body. So they all work in tandem. They all work with each other and sometimes against each other, unfortunately, if trauma is present. And we have the afferent fibers and the efferent fibers. And how all of these components work with each other, I'm going to let you know now. So as you can see, we have the central nervous system, which is the brain and the spinal cord, and we have the peripheral nervous system, which is what I just told you, the somatic nervous system and the vegetative nervous system. Now, the somatic nervous system controls all processes that we can consciously perform, like reflexes, even though reflexes are not really conscious, and the skeletal muscles. So control of the arms and legs. If you're going to flex your arm right now, you can definitely control it. That's the somatic nervous system. Yes, the vegetative nervous system controls all important basic functions in the body, such as breathing, digestion, metabolism, all the other organs. And you don't have a voluntary control except for your breath that you can voluntarily control. The somatic nervous system, or the SNS, consists of cranial nerves and spinal nerves. That's why cranial is something that's going to pop up every now and then, ever so often, because cranial has something to do with the nerves near your cranium, right? Near the head. So that's why it was important for you to know the planes. And the spinal nerves located outside of the central nervous system. So again, we'll see CNS, SNS, VNS coming or reappearing. There are 12 pairs of cranial nerves, 31 pairs of spinal nerves, which are 8 cervical, which is here, cervical, 12 thoracic, T1 until T12, 5 lumbar from L1 to L5, and 1 coccygeal, or coccygeal. I always don't know how to pronounce that, but please correct me if I'm wrong. I know there's some of y'all who know the pronunciation here. So again, the cervical is classified as C1, C2, C3, and C1. This is where you have the atlas. The atlas is like the first, not the first nerve, but the first vertebrae, right? So the nerves run along the vertebrae or vertebras of the spine, and they are classified with these numbers. So I know some of you do FRC, you know exactly where these are, or most of the time, you know exactly where these are in your client's body because you can feel them. And as a trauma healer, I don't think it's necessary to always know, oh, is this L? Blah, blah, blah. But what you should know, in my opinion, is where L kind of starts, kind of like approximately where L starts, approximately where thoracic starts. And we're going to feel that. We're going to definitely feel that when we meet each other live. Or if you want, you can test it out with your guinea pig of choice. Yeah. Yes. And I always find that body work works throughout the spine. It is so easy for me to do body work with the spine as opposed to when people are lying down or when people are lying on their backs. Like, it's so much easier for me if people sit down because I can feel so much going through the spine with my fingers. Yeah. Anything else? So if you ask Mariam, we're going to provide a little bit of a deeper insight once we officially start with the training, right? We're going to provide a deeper insight on German New Medicine, on TCM, on meta medicine, on how Mariam reads the information. However, you need to know, and I'm also going to provide the book for you. However, the book's only available in German, so we need to find like a way to translate it for you. For instance, the L, the lumbar. So places in the spine have a lot to do with topics, right? Lumbar topics are oftentimes about people pleasing, are oftentimes about letting go, about submitting, about yielding, about softening. So control is what the lumbar is also about. So you will find during your practice, there are so many things that happen, for instance, more in the thoracic area. Thoracic area is more of a like, I'm not good enough. It's sadness is there as well. We have shame, we have guilt. That's also more in the thoracic area. So you'll find topics connected with these parts of the somatic nervous system, with the cranial nerves and the spinal nerves. And it's just so fucking interesting to see what's truly at play here. Alrighty. So the structure of the somatic nervous system is comprised of the posterior roots, which is the radix posterior, which contains sensory information and afferent fibers. And then we have the anterior roots, which is the radix anterior, which contains motor information and afferent fibers. Now, I brought you like the structure of this is a spinal cord and this is one vertebrae. And then you can see the dorsal root. You can see the ventral root, dorsal meaning behind. Remember, it's starting already. Ventral is in front, and here's the spinal nerve. Ganglion is just a collection. Basically, in easy words, it's a collection of nerves. It's like a collection where you have more things than one going on. Right. And then you have the dorsal horn and the ventral horn. And these, so what's happening within these, you have within the spinal nerve, you have afferent fibers, afferent and afferent. It's really hard to distinguish, to be honest with you. And afferent, are going up and efferent are going down. So we'll do that later on. You know, sometimes I even mistake the two, but I've always kind of remembered like afferent is going up and efferent is going down. Why? Because when you when you jack someone off, it's motor information, so it's going down, efferent. Well, you know, so sensory, you're saying, it's going up. Oh, this is a really nice way of remembering stuff. And the afferent fibers are transporting what you feel, and the efferent fibers are transporting what you do. So it's basically feeling commands and doing commands. What is this? No, I don't want hand gestures here. Excuse me. So What does the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system do? What is it responsible for? Again, it latches on through the ganglions in the spinal and the cranial nerves. And it's so interesting. And most of them are thoracic, though. They're not cranial. Sorry for that. They're thoracic. But the parasympathetic nervous system goes directly from the cranial nerves and the sacral nerves, which is very just know, right? It's not, again, you don't need to remember all of this by heart. You can study it all you want, but when you actually come to explaining this to people, you would have to re-explain this anyways. And then, the reason why I kept this black and white is so that you can easily copy, you can easily screenshot pictures that you need, or I even posted some of the origins and the sources for you to just find them, and then you can use them for your own master classes or whatnot. So let's start with the parasympathetic. What you have to know about the sympathetic and parasympathetic system is that they work in tandem. They go up and down and up and down like a wave, right? And in the ideal world, when the parasympathetic is active, the sympathetic is dormant, and vice versa. So the parasympathetic nervous system starts at the cranial nerves. So we have these many places starting from the cranial nerves, and then from the sacral, we have the uterus and we have the urinary system. There are some things that may be contra-intuitive. Like you'll be like, what? Oh, counterintuitive. You'll be like, what is why is that? I'm going to explain it to you. So the parasympathetic, you have the constriction of the pupil. You have the heart slowing down, because parasympathetic is all about relaxation when it is not in a dysregulated state. So we're now just talking about the normal regulated states, right? Not dysregulation. That's still up to come. Sorry, it's a lot. So slow heartbeat, airways are constricted, the bronchial tubules are constricted. The liver stimulates bile release, the blood vessels constrict, the digestive system stimulates activity, so you get to relax and digest, right? Relax and digest. Uterus relaxes, yeah. And the urinary system increases the urinary output. Yeah? Yeah. Now, the sympathetic, this is where you have the fight-flight mode. This is where you become active. The pupils dilate. They need information, right? What's going on? Heart rate increases because, you have to do something. Something's happening. I am also more in the sympathetic state right now because I'm explaining this to you. I'm not just chilling, relaxing, just breathing slowly. I'm actually explaining it to you. That's why we have to dilate the bronchial tubules, because you need more airflow. I need to breathe, right? I need to breathe more because I'm explaining this to you. The sweat gland stimulates secretion because maybe I'm running hot and I need to cool down. The liver increases the rate of glycogen to glucose, which means ready energy availability, like, right? Glycogen to glucose, so that glucose can be shot as energy into my system. Like, oh, she needs energy, let's go. The digestive system decreases activity. That's why people say you shouldn't, like, after eating, you shouldn't be like too active, because actually being active decreases the activity, even though your fucking stomach is full, right? The adrenal glands, they stimulate the production of adrenaline, and then we stimulate the production of stress hormones, of cortisol, and so on, noradrenaline, and so on. Then we will still, don't worry, we will still have a hormone, a part of hormone, which I'm going to produce. The uterus. The uterus has vaginal contractions, right? So when we are giving birth, we have vaginal contractions. We have the contractions for the birth canal, and in the urinary system, it relaxes the bladder, which is funny. It's funny because some people need to pee. Some people need to urgently pee when they become nervous, when they're in a sympathetic arousal state, as we say, because it relaxes the bladder. It doesn't constrict the bladder. So pee just comes out. Like, you just need to pee. However, you don't need to poop, because pooping only happens when the digestive system is relaxed, right? In the parasympathetic state. And since it takes longer to poop and it takes so much faster to urinate, you'll also see, like, when, for instance, when horses, or camels, they usually poop when they're standing. Some of them poop as they're going because they're used to it, but peeing they can always do. They don't need to, they can just let it, just let it rip. Right. And you see that when you have a baby, like a baby doesn't want to be moved while it's pooping. Like it's literally just like, and it's so funny, like to actually watch a baby poop live. All right. Oh yeah. And because I kind of forgot, like the thoracic part basically and the lumbar part are mostly activated when it comes to the sympathetic nervous system. Yeah. So now we still have a little bit of more detail. So again, a ganglion, the plural of ganglia, is a cluster of nerve-celled bodies in the peripheral nervous system. So again, you can see the parasympathetic nervous system and the sympathetic nervous system a little bit just more close up, right? And then you can see also there's some parts that I wanted you to see, which is like stimulates gallbladder when we're in the parasympathetic, and inhibits digestive activity, stimulates epinephrine and norepinephrine release. Yeah, so these are things that I wanted you to see. Inhibition of adrenaline production when you're in the parasympathetic. And it's also funny because we do have stimulate salivation, also really cool, inhibit salivation. We have a state in the parasympathetic nervous system. We have like the normal regulated state and the dysregulated state. Same for the sympathetic nervous system. We have a normal and dysregulated state, which I will explain to you in the later stages of polyvagal theory. Alrighty. And then as I said earlier, the relaxed rectum relaxes the rectum, meaning that you can poop. And here you can like ejaculate, come, orgasm, contracts the rectum. Yeah. So that's why when you do anal, you need to be in parasympathetic nervous, like you need to be relaxed as fuck. If you're scared, yeah, you're gonna tense up. That's just how the body works. All right. So now we're going to look at the terms ventral and dorsal. And this is just to say ventral is in front and dorsal is more towards the back. Yeah, that's the only difference. But also the functions are different. This is going to be super important for you to remember. We have the two of these are the parasympathetic branches, and this is the sympathetic branches of the nervous system. So the golden one is the sympathetic, and the red and the blue are the parasympathetic. But they both have a different purpose. The blue one here that you can see spans across the face, spans across the upper, like the cervical region, spans across like all the way to the chest and the heart. This is the ventral vagus nerve. This is linked to nerves controlling the face, neck, larynx, and inner ear. This is the social engagement system. You will hear so much more on it, but just let me tell you this is the social engagement system. Super important for co-regulation. Actually, the most important system for co-regulation, the ventral vagus nerve. Then we have the dorsal vagus nerve, which is responsible for all the other organs that you can see here, right? That were mentioned earlier here. All of these other organs that are not just chest and right. So the digestive activity, gallbladder, and so on and so forth. All the way to the rectum. And they don't necessarily work together with the fight flight response, but sometimes they do. So we just have to be mindful of it. And it says immobility, but it's not responsible for immobility. It's just a way to differentiate the social engagement system and the dorsal vagus nerve. The dorsal vagus nerve is the parasympathetic nervous system that's responsible for the rest, for everything basically chest down, and can lead to immobility and freeze. Yeah. And then we have the fight flight, which is the sympathetic nervous system, which can be both positive, regulated sympathetic nervous system or fight flight response, right? Okay. So this is how we differentiate. In any case, should you have any questions, just don't hesitate to ask in the Q&A chat. So let us continue. You probably heard of the vagus nerve. The vagal nerve or vagus nerve is one of the longest nerves, biggest nerves in the body that stretches all the way to all the organs. And I just wanted to stress it because it's going to reappear ever so often. And one of the most important or most interesting even nerve systems is the enteric nervous system, which is the gut brain. As you can see, the vagus nerve goes all the way to the gut, all the way down. See the yellow line right here, right? All the way down. So the enteric nervous system is completely autonomous. It's a completely autonomous nervous system that is home to 70% of immune cells. The ENS independently controls most of our digestion, and the gut brain connection never breaks down throughout our entire lives. Processes in the gut influence emotions, thoughts, and to some extent cognitive performance. As you all know, I'm sure you do, if you eat 5 weeks of McDonald's, you're not going to feel good anymore for like a valid reason, right? Because you're eating dead food. Yeah, and that's basically the enteric nervous system acting on its own. In this training, we're not going to focus very much on the enteric nervous system. However, when we see each other live, I'm going to show you a couple of fascia maneuvers. I'm going to give you a couple of insights. This training is still going to grow. So whenever I grow with the fascia maneuvers, I I will gladly invite you to it and then add to the training. Now, this is a bit unclear. I don't know what happened here, but I just wanted to show you the different types of nerves. I'm just going to read it for you so you can see it. So here we have the central nervous system, the cerebrum, cerebellum, brainstem, spinal cord, the cranial nerves with the vagus, the thoraco-abdominal nerves, the intercostal, subcostal. I don't think you need to know all of them. The lumbar plexus nerves, obturator, femoral, yeah. You don't need to know, but you need to know where it starts and where it ends, kind of, so that you know when you touch people where that nerve is coming from. Then you have the pudendal nerve, very important nerve here in the body. The sacral plexus nerves, going from kind of your belly button, the sciatica, the tibial, the common perineal, deep perineal. Yeah, and then we have the brachial plexus nerves. Then you have the radial, median, ulnar. Just the nerves at the arm. They're not that. I mean, they're all important, but to us, in our practice, they're not that. The brachial plexus nerves are not that important. All right. So, what is the structure of a nerve cell? What is a freaking nerve? We have the soma, or the cell body. That's why it's so funny how everything's called somatic. Soma is just the cell body. It's just the body, right? Soma is just another word for body. The soma or cell body contains dendrites that dock onto the axon terminals of other nerve cells. So we have the dendrites here. Shoop, shoop. See the dendrites? Bloop, bloop. It's like a hair, dendrites. And these later on dock onto the axon terminals of other nerve cells. These are axon terminals, bloop, and they will dock onto this. But I have another picture of that, right? So you don't need to hear me do my sound effects. The signal usually travels from the dendrites via the axon to the synapses. So we have this dude, right? So the signal comes here into the dendrites via the cell body into the axon, and the axon has myelin sheaths, as you can see here. These myelin sheaths are fatty and they protect the axon if it is damaged. And if it does not heal, if the myelin sheath is damaged and does not heal, the nerve cell can die, which is not ideal, not cool, right? So this is where neuropathies comes in, which is called nerve damage. I love these pictures. They're so amazing. So we have the dendrites, right? The nucleus, as you see, you have the direction of the nerve impulse. We call this unnerving, right? Not to be mistaken with you're unnerving. It's a different thing. And we have the myelin sheath, we have the axon and then the axon terminals, and then the synapses that will connect to the dendrites of another cell. So this is a healthy nerve cell and this is an unhealthy nerve cell. And nerve damage, this could, for instance, cause Alzheimer's, this can cause Parkinson's, so many different types of diseases that this can cause. So if a damaged myelin sheath, that means the pathway won't work and there's a loss of feeling, because nerve cells send impulses, electrical impulses to each other that have a certain message. And that message can be, I feel something, I don't feel something. I am in pain, right? So we have different types of nerves, which I'm going to go into right now. We have different kinds of neurons as well, right? So this whole thing is a nerve cell, but then we also have different types of neurons based on how they look. So for example, we have the unipolar. These are embryonic development. So there's just a cell body. There's no dendrite. There's nothing that it starts here. And then we have the myelin sheath here. And then we have kind of like, which makes sense because embryonic development has to start somewhere, right? So this is like a starter neuron. Then we have the bipolar, which is usually found in the retina, olfactory epithelium, which is in your nose, and the inner ear. And then you have like a sensory receptor, which makes sense, right? So you need to smell something, and the olfactory epithelium is the sensory receptor. And then you have the energy, then you have the cell body, and then you go off to the dendrites, right? So this is how it works. And then you have the pseudo-unipolar, which is spinal ganglion, which you saw earlier, and in the sensory ganglia of cranial nerves. This is what it looks like. It doesn't really need a myelin sheath because it is in a ganglion, so it's a collection of nerve cells anyways, like a scrunched up nerve cell collection. And then we have the multipolar, which are neurons that are the most common, which are found in the anterior horn of the spinal cord, the cerebral cortex, and the cerebellar cortex, and the cerebral cortex. Excuse me. So these are the normal, like we've seen earlier, the multipolar neurons. The structure of a nerve cell in itself is also super interesting. And I found this really cute picture, which I wanted to kind of, talk to you about. So we have basically the neurons right here, which we just talked about. We have the dendrites, as you can see. We have the organelles. We have the group of, the nucleus, the ganglion, and so on. And then we have what is called the action potential. The action potential is the energy that goes through the axon, and is protected by the myelin sheath. This is just a cute way to show that it's protected. Right. Then we have in the myelin, this thing here, you have something called the glial cells. Again, you don't need to remember all of this. I'm just giving this to you. You don't need to remember it, okay? So we have the oligodendrocytes, which are these. Then we have the Schwann cells, which are these. Schwann cells. And then we have the astrocytes, which are these. Yeah. So these are the three things. And the astrocytes, they're in the central nervous system. Again, central nervous system, the Schwann cells, which are these, are in the peripheral nervous system. And the astrocytes are also in the central nervous system, so in the brain. Structural metabolic support, and they are resident immune cells. They nourish the blood-brain barrier because the blood-brain barrier is actually very important. Obviously, it filters things that are not supposed to go into certain areas, especially these very sensitive areas of the neurons. And this is what the blood-brain barrier looks like. So we have the endothelial cells that basically block this, and the tight junctions that block it, and that, so it can't go through. However, there's certain elements that can go through the brain-blood barrier. This motherfucker can't, right? This obviously can, but oxygen can go through, water can go through, and this is very important to know. Yeah, that's it. So, what kinds of neurons are there? Sometimes I have these walls of text, so just bear with me. This is for you when you study it later on and you don't hear my voice, you can just go back to this and it's actually written out. So that's why I put all of that text there. So we have the sensory neurons, we have the projection neurons, the interneurons, the neuroendocrine neurons, and the motor neurons. The sensory neurons, they convey afferent information. Remember, sensory. Afferent information from the internal and external environment to the central nervous system. Sensory, right? Afferent. There you go. Projection neurons, they conduct impulses from one location to a more distant area of the brain. These are multipolar Golgi type 1 cells. Again, you don't need to remember that. That's just It's just part of the explanation. Interneurons, they connect nerve cells within a region and are primarily responsible for information processing. They're also known as multipolar Golgi type 2 cells. Neuroendocrine neurons, neuroendocrine, you can probably tell by the name, ability to synthesize and release hormones. So they have something. Endocrine is the endocrine system is the hormonal system. Motor neurons consist of upper and lower motor neurons. Upper motor neurons are located in the motor cortex and transmit efferent impulses to the lower motor neuron. The lower motor neuron is located in the anterior horn of the spinal cord. There, their axons leave the spinal canal oh my gosh, the spinal canal as spinal nerves to innervate supply nerve impulses to the skeletal muscles. Again, I told you earlier, innervate is the word to supply nerve impulse. So the nerve impulse is the innervation. Yeah. All right. The synapse structure. I love this. This is also so cute. Now you know we have synapses, which are in the axon terminals. As you can see above, this is the neuromuscular junction. This is neuromuscular, something like connected to muscles. This could be like, I don't know, this could be like the impulse to contract is connected to this. Let me just give you an example, right? So then the energy goes here, and then the axon terminal has the synapse structure, and then it innervates the skeletal muscle fiber to contract, for instance. Then we have the neuroglandular synapses. This has something to do with glands. What are glands? Sweat glands. Yeah. So then you have the neural pathway of, oh shit, she's too hot. It's getting too hot. We need to activate sweat glands. Dude, I feel like sometimes I'm like on these shows that explain things, and yeah. And then they do it in a cute way. So yeah. So then the glands secrete sweat to cool you down. And then we have synapses with other neurons when it's really just imagine, right? These neurons are super, super tiny. So we have to think about, okay, they have to be with other neurons to relay the information. Some of them don't have a really long axon. There are neurons that have really long axons. Yes, that exists. But then in certain areas, they don't. They have like connections so that they can connect to other places. And remember, there is such a thing called neural plasticity. That means the brain is flexible. The brain can still create neurons or kill neurons. Yeah, sucks, but it's the truth. Now, this is a synaptic cleft. I love this word. I've always remembered this word since my psychology studies because I just found it so cool, the synaptic cleft. And we have the presynaptic axon. Anything presynaptic just means here, see, in the axon. It's not in the axon terminal yet. That's presynaptic. That's what it means. The nerve impulse comes in. We have these microtubules. It's like the nerve impulse. Then we have mitochondria. We have synaptic vesicles, I think is the pronunciation. And these vesicles have the neurotransmitters inside of them. They carry the neurotransmitters, and the neurotransmitters are produced somewhere here and being released. Yeah. So here you see the receptors. The receptors are super important because some receptors can be blocked. They can be blocked by certain conditions that people are in. And that's why people, especially when we go to, and I will teach you that anyways with pictures and all, especially when we go to medicine, I forgot the English term, but I'll find it out for you. So when we look at medicine for, let's say, schizophrenia, medicine for psychosis, medicine for antidepressants, they usually have some of them, because there are different types, some of them have, for instance, a neurotransmitter reuptake limiter. That means the neurotransmitters cannot be taken up, or they basically free a receptor so that neurotransmitters can be taken up, if that makes sense. Because here we're talking about neurotransmitters generally are things like serotonin, dopamine. So these neurotransmitters, they have specific information and they release that specific information. That's how drugs work as well. Drugs release lots of dopamine so that you feel, whoa, I'm so happy, right? I feel so high. But at some point, either the receptors get blocked because they can't take up so much, or the synaptic vesicles won't carry any neurotransmitters anymore. The neurotransmitter production is depleted. That sucks. So, I already explained, I think, way too much than I wanted to. Let's just go into the chemical signal transmissions. So we have the endocrine, the paracrine, and the synaptic. The endocrine is the global distribution of hormones originating from endocrine cells through circulation, for example, the blood system, and specificity due to many hormone types. The paracrine is the regional distribution of pheromones. It's very interesting. Pheromones from secretory cells in the extracellular space. Neurocrine, when the secretory cell is a neuron, example of a signal, responds to allergens, tissue repair, scar formation, and blood clotting. Then we have the synaptic, which is the neurotransmitter is released from the presynaptic neuron into the synaptic cleft, binds to the target cell, and triggers a response. And these are the types that we can find. So we can find endocrine, paracrine, or neurocrine, which is kind of like the same, and synaptic. Again, you probably don't need to know all of this. I'm just giving this to you as added information. So let's look at depression. Let's look at the healthy synapse and let's look at the synapse of a depressed person. You don't know by now yet, but you will know that depression is just a parasympathetic or a dysregulated parasympathetic response, but you cannot just regulate it. It really depends on why the depression came up, what the origin is, because that has to be dissolved first in order for the person to regulate itself. Like the person doesn't need extra somatic regulation, to be honest. Most of the time they don't. They just need to dissolve the root cause. So, healthy synapse means we have the axon, the mitochondria, we have more neurotransmitters released, we have enzymes that get released as well, and these are being taken up of the receptor. So here you can see a bigger picture because this picture is just a bit limited, This is just So there are more receptors than just like 2 or 3. And then again, you have the receptors being taken up and then into the dendrite, and then the whole story continues again. So these have a certain message, right? The synapse of a depressed person is that the neurotransmitters are still coming out. So you see even fewer, right? Even fewer. And the receptors are also fewer. So there's fewer information being transmitted. And let's say if this is dopamine, fewer dopamine that gets released and less dopamine that gets reuptaken, unfortunately. The types of receptors. So here we have exteroceptors, enteroreceptors, and proprioceptors. Some of them you may have heard before. The exteroceptors are detection of stimuli from the environment. These are mechanoreceptors, thermoreceptors, or nociceptors. Mechanoreceptors, mechanical, like shaking. Thermoreceptors, I think that's very clear. Thermal. If something's hot, cold, etc., then your body has these extra receptors to respond to that. The nociceptors, I always want to say nociceptors. Nociceptors is pain reception, right? These are pain receptors. So if somebody kicks you, ouch, hurts. Detection of conditions in the body internal environment, these are enteroreceptors. Quite easy to remember, right? Entero, extero. Information from fields of internal organs. These are also mechanoreceptors because like rupture or like shaking or stimuli or something like that. Chemoreceptors, these are chemical receptors that just that track the chemical balance within your body, and also pain, right? Nociceptors, internal pain that's happening, as opposed to somebody kicking you, maybe your gut is painful or something like that. Then we have the proprioceptors, which is this perception of spatial position and mechanical stress, muscular and skeletal system, muscle spindles, tendon organs, mechanoreceptors, etc. So this is very, very interesting because we work with proprioception in a more somatic way when we do somatic work with our clients. It's the perception of spatial position and mechanical stress. So this is like the basic of it, right? Where am I in the space provided? And how do I know, right? How can I sense that? So how are stimuli processed? They're processed so quickly you can't even, like, it's faster than a reflex. So the eye sees a car. The brain processes it as a threat. The brain activates the muscles to jump away, for instance. Very, very easy, very straightforward, right? Then we have sensory, afferent, remember, moving from the sensory organ to the brain, spinal cord, which means this is the sensory organ, the eye. The sensory or the afferent nerve moves in the direction of excitation conduction. It's also not so important. This is just a term, but like it moves into the brain. So from the sensory organ to the brain. The dendrites here are the extensions of nerve cells that receive the stimuli, right? You know that. Then the brain goes into the efferent nerves, which is the motor nerves moving toward the muscle, direction of excitation, conduction, and the axon endings here making you move. So this is the nerve, how the stimuli is processed as a nerve response. Now, here we have perception and action reaction. So the perception is the sensory part: see, hear, feel, touch, pain, etc., taste, smell, depth, sensitivity, and sense of position. So this is the peripheral nervous system. Goes to the central nervous system. The afferent nerve cells transmit sensory stimuli from the PNS to the CNS. The efferent transmit motor stimuli from the CNS to the PNS. So it goes back down. Voluntary movement, skeletal muscles, autonomic, not controlled, muscles and organs, and we go into action reaction. This happens so quickly, like a second even, right? It's so fast. Less than a second even, I would say. Now you can see the vertebrae, and now you can see what I was talking about earlier, where the stimulus is going to the brain is what is located here. This is the dorsal horn, I believe. And then the stimulus that's going from the brain to the muscle is in this part, right? So this part here is to the brain, and this part is going on the other side as well, going down to the muscle and these parts. So everything that's green is going to the brain, and everything that's a bit like grayish is going down to the organs. So interesting to know. Because, okay, this is important because there's this big thing in the somatic and nervous system industry where it's like, 80% of your nerves are afferent and 20% are efferent. That's bullshit. It's 50-50. It depends on which nerves you talk about, first of all, because in a healthy working body, it's both. They both have to work in tandem, right? So afferent and efferent neurons, there we are. This is what I've been explaining at the beginning. So the afferent neurons, they carry sensory info from receptors in skin, other organs into the central nervous system. Cell bodies are located outside of the spinal cord. So as you can see here, we have the afferent neurons, which which is blue, coming from the skin, for example, going up. There's a dorsal root ganglion, and then going all the way up. And then we have the response. The response is either, for example, the autonomic division regulates involuntary body response. The blood vessels have to constrict, or the blood vessels have to, or the heart has to pump, or whatever. And then we have the efferent neurons, which is the somatic division, the voluntary movement by skeletal muscles. Yeah, I think that's about as voluntary as you can get. And this is how it looks like in the spinal cord. Yes. And then just a little discourse on reflexes. We probably won't need them. Know that there's such a thing as called reflex integration therapy. This is when when children don't have or adults don't have their motor reflex integrated, and so on and so forth. We will go more in depth into it when we look at children development, because that's a huge, long ass thing. It took me forever to record, forever to create, and I am beyond grateful to have my lovely assistant help me with translating all of this, because she's a gem, and this is just helping making things much smoother than yeah than they were when I did this all by myself. So again, here with the reflexes, we have the sensory, the afferent, we have the efferent, and then we have the spinal cord, right? Same thing. And then if you pop this knee, I think you know this, like it just triggers a reflex that's just fast. The rotation of the tendon leads to immediate contraction of the muscle. So that's a reflex, really. What does our nervous system want? It wants homeostasis, which means balance within the system, a balance between parasympathetic and sympathetic. It wants to ensure and secure our survival. It doesn't want us to be happy, okay? It doesn't want us to be content. It doesn't want us doesn't even want us to be sad. It just ensures our survival. It wants to protect us as a human being. And it chooses, important for later, it chooses the path of least resistance. This is where neuroception comes in, which I will talk about in a later module. You will find a copy of this presentation within the Module 1 presentations list that you can find at the bottom below Module 1. And this is it for our very first module. Thank you so much for listening, and happy learning!